Alright, hey, so this is a tutorial I promised on how to texture using Blender and Clip Studio Paint. So let's start with Blender, just modeling something very simple, and then UV unwrapping it, and then exporting it for Clip Studio Paint. So for this, I'm just going to make something very simple, probably like, let's make a little bird. So I'm going to hit Control R, and that's going to let me make a loop cut. And left click to select the amount, and then right click to center it. Then again, Control R, left click, and right click. And then I'm going to hit 1 on my keyboard to go into point mode. Previously I was in edge mode, which is you go into by hitting 2 on your keyboard. And then if you hit 3, you'd go into face mode. These are the 3 different modes in Blender. So it went in point mode, which was again 1 on the keyboard. I'm going to select the center dot and then hit G to move it around. And I'm going to hit X just to lock into the X-axis. And I'm just going to move it out a little bit. And this will be our bird's beak face thing. And then I'm going to go into 3, face mode, select these 2 on the bottom. Then I'm going to hit E to extrude, and then S to extrude inner. And I'm going to make like a little square here. And then I'm going to hit E again, and carry this down a little bit. And this will be the leg. And then I'm going to hit Control R to make a loop cut here. And then 3, face mode, select these 2. And then E, make a little foot for our bird. And then maybe even hit S, X, or S and Y rather, just to make it like a little different looking. And then lastly, I'm going to hit 2 on the keyboard and selected these 2 back here, these 2 lines, and then hit E to extrude, X to lock into the X-axis, and put it to around here, maybe G and Z to move it, and then move it only in the Z-axis, and then S and Y to scale it, and scale it only in the Y-axis. And that'll be our little tail for the bird. This is good enough, I think, for what we need. And then lastly, I'm going to, this isn't as necessary, but I like doing this. I'm going to select these 2 faces. I'm going to hit Shift S to bring up this menu. And I'm going to go cursor to selected. So that puts our 3D cursor on this exact spot where this is. I'm going to hit Tab to leave edit mode, go into object mode, and then right click, set origin to 3D cursor. And that just means our little bird's pivot point, or origin rather, is on its foot rather than in the middle of its body. And then I'm just going to hit Shift S, cursor to world origin, and then Shift S again, selection to cursor. Now our bird is standing on its leg in the center of the world. Our brave little bird. Okay, so that's the modeling. Now we're going to go into UV editing, which is this tab on the top right here, where my mouse is. Okay, we're in UV editing now, and we have our bird. UV editing starts us off in editing mode automatically. So what we need to do here is we need to split up the faces in a way that makes it easy for us to texture. So what we'll do is we hit 2 on the keyboard, and we will make cuts in our bird. So what we're going to do is we'll split it off in spots where it makes sense to split it up. So for instance, the face probably can be its own thing. So what we'll do is we'll select these edges, which I'm doing by holding Shift and while in edge mode, clicking on the edges, so they're highlighted orange. And then I'm going to click U on my keyboard, and that's going to bring up the UV mapping menu. And I'm going to hit Mark Seam. So now these are marked red, so for later it knows to cut in those spots. And then I'm going to make a few more cuts. I'm going to make one here, 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 and here, so that it knows for this back side and the sides of the bird to unwrap it kind of like a cardboard box. So again, U, mark seam, now they're red. Then where the leg connects to the body, that also should be cut off separately because they're very distinct shapes. So I'm going to select all of these. And again, U, mark seam. And then for the leg, similarly, this foot part should probably be separate. So I'm going to cut around the foot, U, mark seam. And then I'm going to make one cut over here so that this whole foot thing can unwrap nicely. Because if you don't make a cut on one of the sides of like a rectangular prism or a cube, it'll do like this weird contortion thing where it tries to like wrap it, make it round, and it doesn't look good. So we're going to do that, U mark seam. Then on the foot, I think we have to do a similar thing. We need to make a cut here, 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 and here. U and mark seam. And then lastly, on the tail, we're just going to select all the outer edges of the tail and then hit U, mark seam, and our tail now also is separately cut. So presumably this should work, but we'll see. Sometimes you miss something when UV unwrapping. You don't think of how something will get cut, and you'll have to make changes later. So we'll hit, before we do that actually, we'll hit Tab to leave edit mode, go into object mode, select our bird, and then Control A, open up this menu, and apply the scale. Because currently the scale, it might be, okay, the scale currently is 1 because we didn't do any changes to it in edit mode. But sometimes you'll make something and you'll make changes to it and it messes with the scale. And if the scale isn't set to 1 when you're UV unwrapping, it could do weird things to the size of the texture maps. So it's always best to Control A and scale, just to be sure. Now we'll go back into edit mode by hitting Tab. Then we hit A to select the whole thing, and then U. And in the UV mapping menu, we hit Unwrap. And that unwraps the bird. So let's see how this looks. I'm going to hit 3 to go into face selection. And one more thing, I have this on automatically, but if this little blue arrow, which I don't know if you can see on the recording, let me actually shift it over a little. If this little blue box is not checked blue, be sure to do that so that you can see both sides on both screens. Just makes your life a lot easier. Okay, let's see how this unwrapped. So the tail looks fine. The beak looks fine. The body looks fine too. So does the foot. But the leg, something went wrong. We must have forgotten to make a cut somewhere. The leg, it seems like oh, we did not make a cut here. We should have made a cut here. So we'll select it, hit U, mark seam, and then again, let's select the whole thing, UV unwrap. It looks better, but it still doesn't look quite right. Something is still missing. And if you don't fix these things before texturing, you'll get like weird distortions in your texture because the face is being distorted. So this is that. I think we should also put a thing here. And there we go. Now it's fixed. So now we have our whole UV unwrapped nicely. But we can't really just, we could leave it like this, but it would make texturing kind of annoying. Because for instance, if you want to texture the bird, but the body, but this is like rotated diagonally, it'd be like weird. You have to like tilt your canvas and do all this weird stuff. So we can make our life easier by changing it now. So by selecting the faces, by dragging with your mouse and holding shift, you can rotate them until they're in a better spot. So I'm rotating this 135 degrees by typing in 135 on the keyboard, and that looks nicer now. And as you can see, these faces are corresponding to the ones here. Now for the leg, since the leg is like horizontal, or sorry, it's vertical rather, but it's horizontal here, we should probably rotate it to better match this. So these two are these two. So what we'll do is we'll select all of this, again like this, and then rotate it 90 degrees by typing 90 on the keyboard. And now it matches. For the foot, similarly, this should be at the top. So we're going to select it, click R to rotate, and we're going to again do about 130 degrees, it seems. Sometimes we're not going to get like exactly right, but it's fine because nobody's going to notice, usually. Then the beak is already in a good spot. All the faces match where they are. Bottom right, top left, top right, and bottom left. And then finally the tail should probably be matching this. So we're going to select it. Another way besides dragging to select something that's like connected is hover over it and hit L on the keyboard, and that'll select everything that's connected. And then I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. And now what we're going to do is move our faces around a little bit, just so they're in an easier spot for us to texture. So again, I'm hitting L to select all of this, G to move it around, or using the cursor select, either one works, G to move it around. I'm just going to move all of these out of this box, because this box is where all our texturing will go. Anything outside of this box won't really appear on the model. So I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to move the beak over to maybe here, the tail, the leg, and finally the foot. And be sure to give yourself space between each UV. So give yourself space here and here, and also from the sides of the image. That way you won't have like stuff bleeding into each other. So now we've unwrapped our bird. Now we just need to export the UV map. So what we do is we'll select this whole thing by doing this, or by hitting A on the keyboard. That selects everything. And we're going to go into UV in this menu on the left and export UV layout. Then we're going to go into whatever folder we want to save this in. So I made a folder for this tutorial called tutorial. I'm going to call it bird.png. And for the size, I have it set to 2048 at the moment, but you can always change it. Usually it's good to have the size set to like a square. Once all this is good, we hit export UV layout. And in our folder, we see the UV layout. It's a little hard to tell because my file thing is dark, but you can see our UV layout is in like an image format over here. Now a couple more things we need to do before we can go into Clip Studio Paint is we're going to go into shading, this tab over here, and what we need to do is we have to make a material for the bird so that we can see what we're texturing over it once we're in Clip Studio. So all we have to do is select the bird, hit New over here. That'll make a material. And now we're going to hit, while hovering in this area, we're going to hit Shift and A. And then in this thing that appears, we're going to go to Texture and Image Texture. And we'll get this. We'll plop it down over here. We're going to hit Open and go to where we saved our bird texture. Select it, Open Image. Then we're going to, in this little pop-up underneath, we're going to go from linear to closest. And then we're going to grab this yellow circle and drag it into this one that says base color. And now it's applying the texture to our material, although it doesn't look quite right yet. Then we're going to grab this one that says alpha, zoom out a little before that, and drag it into the one that says alpha in here. Still doesn't look quite right, but as you can see, you can kind of see the lines in the UV on the bird, like right here, for instance. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go over here on the right to Material Properties, this little like red circle, and scroll down till we get to Settings. If it's closed, just open it. And under Blend Mode, we want to hit Alpha Blend. And now our bird is transparent. You can like see through it. I could turn up the world opacity a little bit just so it's easier. You can see through our bird, and you could also see where the UVs are cut. So like these thicker black lines. And so now we have this material applied to our bird. So what we'll do is we will go into layout mode. And before exporting, one more thing I want to mention is currently the bird is in the center of the world, which you can see because it's standing where the red and the green lines line up. Now, if you're working on a project with multiple objects, let's say we have another bird over here, another one over here, and let's say they're different objects and you want to do each one of them differently. Well, if you were to export it while it's over here, for some reason, Clip Studio Modeler, when you import it, it won't center the piece for you. It'll import it like relative to where it is in Blender. So this bird will be all the way off to the side, this bird would be all the way off to the side and up here. And generally that's like not very convenient. So whatever you're exporting, before you export it, you want to move it to the center of the world in Blender. Just to say this bird, if it was off to the side, to do that all you have to do is hit Shift and S, do world cursor to world origin, and that puts the 3D cursor, this like life preserver looking thing, in the center of the world. Then select your object, hit Shift and S, and do selection to cursor, and that'll move it to the cursor. And now it's fine to export. So to export, we just select our bird again, go to File, Export, and FBX, because that's the format Clip Studio likes, I guess. And then I'm going to go to the tutorial folder. On the right here, the only option you need to check is where it says Limit To, make sure it only says Selected Objects. Make sure that's checked. It wouldn't be a problem here, since we only have one object, but if you had multiple, and you were exporting, it would export everything into one, and that would be like messy. I'm going to call it bird.fbx, and I'm going to export fbx. And now it should show up in our folder. Yep, we have bird.fbx and bird.png for the UV map. So now we can move on to Clip Studio. Okay, and now on to the texturing part of this. You'll need to open up Clip Studio, and on the side you'll notice you have Paint, and then below that you have Modeler. Now if you don't have Modeler yet, you can just Google Clip Studio Modeler, and the first result will take you to the download for that. And once you download and install, it's just going to be there in the Clip Studio launcher on the side as another option below Paint. So So that should be easy to find. Now, let's open up Modeler. It'll ask you at the start, do you want to make a 3D object or a 3D character? Usually we'll just be making objects. Characters are an option, but we're going to ignore that for now. And we hit Create 3D Object. Make this full screen. And here it gives us our scene. There's a ton of options here, but for what we need, we only need to look at a couple. So on the right here, we have object configurations. And to bring in our object that we made in Blender, we're going to go to Node, click on new, Root Node, and go to this folder, Add File, Add from File. And we're going to go to where we saved our Blender object as an FBX, so bird.fbx, open, and that'll bring in our bird here into the scene. Navigating this is a little different than navigating Blender. You have to like manually change the options every time. It's a little annoying, but it's fine because you're not going to be doing too much anyway. Another thing is planes are only one-sided in this. There might be an option to fix that, but this tail, for instance, you'll notice I can only see it from the top, not the bottom. So we have our bird, and now to edit the bird's texture, all we have to do is we go to over here to the right of Node. We have Material. We open up the folder with the bird's material, Material 02 here, and then at the very bottom, on this bottom right corner, which I realize you cannot see because my camera's covering it, this thing right here, Edit in Paint. We will click that, and that's going to open up Clip Studio Paint. It's going to open up the UV we created in Blender. You can see the map and everything, where all the body parts are. And then it also, you might have briefly seen, opened up a window for viewing our model. So I'm going to adjust my display a little bit, just so we could see both at the same time. And so here we have our bird in this preview window. And on the left, we have Clip Studio, as you probably are already familiar with how to use it. So all you need to know is that when you bring it into Clip Studio, you have this as a new layer, which is the UV map you made. If you hide it, you see it hides on the preview because it's no longer being like painted onto the model. And then if you want to start texturing, you'll create a new layer, and then simply draw over the UVs. So I'm going to lean over here for a little bit because my tablet's over here. And let's say I want to draw, let's make this a green yellowish bird, like an olive. So select a brush and color and whatever else you need, and just start drawing on over the UVs. So when you let go of the pen, you'll notice it starts drawing onto wherever you just had that. So there's, you can do it also with a paint bucket fill, use the select tool, a bunch of ways. I'm just going to draw over it very quickly. And on the side, we'll see that I drew over the body, because that was where the body was. And now let's say we want to draw over the beak. You'll notice also that there's no like lighting or shading in this, so if you're using flat colors, it might be a little hard to tell from some angles what's going on. But once you start adding like detail and shadow to your textures, it'll be easier to see what you're doing. Let me give them some eyes. Another thing is, once you start painting over your UVs, you might lose track of what's what, so you can simply adjust the layer order, and now you can see where your UVs are. It'll show it on the model too, but that's fine because you can always hide them later. Draw an eye here. Maybe then add a little detail to the beak. Let's just finish the bird. So I'm just gonna the tail and draw over the foot. And we have, let me hide this now. And we have a super basic textured bird. We could do more with them. We can give them some detail on the tail. We can also, for planes, such as the tail, we can also use the eraser to make it so they don't look so rectangular. So if I take the eraser, I could start, make it bigger. I could start erasing on top of the tail, within the box, give it like this feathered edge sort of look. And then if you look at the model, you'll notice that that carries over. Oh, once I turn off this, it'll carry over. It's got this like, almost like a cape, more than a feathered look to it. And yeah, you could just do whatever you want with your texture. I was working on one layer, but you can start doing stuff like using different blend modes. So now our bird is a little more like this. Just keep in mind that you might want, if you have opacity like with the tail, you might want to use the clip to layer below option, so that way it doesn't do weird stuff like that. And then once you're happy with your texture, you can save. And we'll save the texture. We'll call it bird, and we'll save it. That's all there is to texturing. You could then, if you would like, bring it back into Blender. Now we can simply go into shading. In shading, we can, let me turn the world opacity down. Go to this thing that we set up earlier, the image texture, and click on the folder icon, and we can swap out the bird UV with the bird texture we created, open the image, and we have a bird. Now it looks a little weird here because we did that alpha blend thing, so if I set it to alpha clip rather, that's what we should have done from the beginning. Yep, alpha clip was the right one, not blend. And we have our bird, all happy and textured in Blender. And then similarly in whatever other program you want to bring it into, you'll be bringing it in is the model, which will be an FBX or an OBJ or whatever format is required, and then you'll be bringing in the image texture we created. So yes, that is pretty much all to texturing between Blender and Clip Studio. I hope it was easy to follow, and I hope, yeah. All right, video's over.